Hello everyone, I'm Keanu and today I'll be ranking all 9 Rocky and Creed movies from the worst to the best. Be sure to leave your own list down below and subscribe if you enjoy this video. With that said, let's get started. Easily coming in at last place is Rocky 5. This is the only movie in the franchise I would consider a bad film, as this franchise is really good overall, but Rocky 5 loses all the charm the other films had. Immediately it starts out with a big consistency issue, as it's meant to take place immediately after Rocky 4, and in that film Rocky's son was 9. In this film he's 14. So he aged 5 years in a very short space of time.
You know, eat your green vegetables.
Also, the setup for the film about Paulie losing the money is pretty lazy, and overall the film is just uninspiring, bland, and filled with really unlikable characters. So it's never really entertaining to watch. Next up we have Rocky 4. By this point the franchise went into a totally different direction than the first film did, as it's much more over the top, and definitely very 80s, but it's still entertaining. This movie can be pretty silly as it features robots and an overabundance of montages. The main plot though is good, as it's a revenge film that goes full Russia vs America, giving Rocky a great rival in Drago. It has a great setup and a great payoff, but it doesn't work for me in the middle. It features way too many montages and basically follows the format of having a dialogue scene, followed by a montage, then repeats that for the whole middle of the film. Even though it's lower down, I still enjoy this movie, there are just others I prefer. Coming in at number 7 is Rocky 3. Even though it's lower down, this is still a fantastic film. This franchise is one of the most consistent in terms of how good the films are, and this one is no different. It's got many highlights like the great end fight, as well as this is the film that focuses on Rocky and Creed becoming friends. Now why it's a bit lower is that this film is the transition point between the serious Rocky movies and the really silly ones, so it feels a bit odd for that reason. Rocky is also rich and famous in this movie, which is something new for the franchise, but it does lose a bit of the charm of the original too. But none of these are big issues, it's still a great movie. That brings us to Rocky 2. This is the sequel that was able to capture the original vibe of the first film the most, and is a worthy follow-up. It could have gone even higher up, but I do think it can be a bit slow at times, and I easily forget what happens in the middle act. But when you get to that training montage and final fight, it is so satisfying. This movie has one of my favorite fights in the entire franchise because of how it uses strategy, and how stressful it can be in the final 10 seconds. Then all of that crescendos with Rocky's victory, and him finally winning the title. The main plot itself feels like the natural continuation of the story in the first film, so this is a great sequel.
I like it.
I know, it's great, right?
Another!
In 5th place is Creed 3. The latest installment is another great addition to the franchise, this time focusing more on Adonis' past and introducing one of the best opponents yet in Damien. Jonathan Majors plays him perfectly, as it can be sympathetic but also brutal and deceiving. The visual style of this movie is also really cool with all the slow motion shots and stylistic fights. It's a solid directorial debut for Michael B. Jordan. It's also nice seeing these characters live 7 years later, and I'm glad they could find a way to include Drago, even if it was only for a small bit. Now one character that's obviously lacking is Rocky. It would have been nice to see him in the film, but I don't think his absence hurts it in any way. So just like the rest of the Creed trilogy, a great film. Next up we have Creed 2. The second film in the Creed franchise, while not being on the same level as the first, is super close. It does the clever thing of tying it into Rocky 4 by bringing back Drago and having his son fight Creed, which is a great premise. It also manages to take a pretty cartoonish character in Ivan Drago and add so much more layers to his character, making him much more human. You really do understand where he's coming from. This plot is really the perfect direction to go in. What keeps it from being top tier though is it can feel a bit familiar. Our hero gets defeated by a superior opponent, trains harder, then beats him at the end. It's a format we've seen before, but that doesn't mean it's still effective. The Rocky ending in this film is also great, and even if we don't see him in future films, this felt like the perfect ending to his story. Entering the top 3 we have the original Creed. This is how you do spin-off films right. The plot of this film about Rocky training Creed's son is such a great idea for this franchise. It manages to take Rocky's story forward, while still putting the spotlight on Adonis. It fits well into this franchise, but still feels unique and different because of how different of a character Creed is compared to Rocky. Also, because of how this film ties into the older ones, it can have some great and emotional moments. Where Rocky's story goes in this film feels like the perfect next step because we have seen him as the fighter, and now he gets to be the mentor. It's just a great film that really displays what spin-off films should be. Movies that stay true to their franchises, but still manage to tell new stories, so this is easily a top tier film. In second place is Rocky Balboa. This is such an inspirational sequel that is able to capture the charm of the original so well. It does a great job of showing the characters from the first film in a different stage of life, and is once again, like most of these films, not about the sport. Instead, it's a character study about a retired fighter wanting to give one more shot. The whole plot of this film about how this fight came to be is also really clever, as it tackles old vs new and gives Rocky a great rival in Mason Dixon. Another great thing about this film is that the dialogue is so on point, as you get some of the best speeches in this film. So easily one of the best and one of the most satisfying Rocky movies that ends his series on a high note. But of course, coming in first place is the original Rocky. The first film is still the best and probably the best sports film ever made, without it even being about the sport. This movie is a character study about an underdog that goes from his shady job as a lone enforcer to finally reaching greatness and taking a shot. Now, I would rewatch most of the other movies on this list over this one, as it's definitely a slow burn and not the most rewatchable, but that doesn't change the fact that it is a masterpiece.
Perfection.
This movie is written so well, with small details are introduced that pay off and matter. It also obviously has a bunch of iconic moments, like the training montage scene, and the soundtrack is really good and uplifting, as it can elevate the simple scene of a man running upstairs, then just transforms it into this satisfying moment. Then of course the actual fight itself is great, as well as Apollo as the rival, another great character. Then by the end you get such a satisfying victory, without Rocky even needing to win, because that's not what the film was about in the first place. This movie is truly a masterpiece and one of the greatest films of all time, that's why it comes in at number 1.